Come now, let us reason together, says the Lord. So we've got some really good stuff to talk about today. And so thank you so much for coming in here. Please do go ahead and like and subscribe if you haven't had a chance yet, because I'm going to give you some good information. We're going to talk about Jesus' empty tomb and the supposed contradictions associated with that. But first, I want to tell you a little story that has to do a little bit with faith that I heard today at my church, at Fishhawk Fellowship Church. And so I heard this little cool stuff. And let me get this. I got this thing just missing. I want to read to you a little story from 2 Kings 5. And because this is a really fascinating story that has a lot to do with faith. It says, now Naaman was commander of the army of the king of Aram. He was a great man in the sight of his master and highly regarded, because through him the Lord had given victory to Aram. He was a valiant soldier, but he had leprosy. Now, I don't know exactly how you can be a soldier with leprosy, but somehow he was one, and he must have just kept his distance, I guess. Now, bands of raiders from Aram had gone out and had taken captive a young girl from Israel, and she served Naaman's wife. She said to her mistress, if only my master would see the prophet who is in Samaria, he would cure him of his leprosy. Naaman went to his master and told him what the girl from Israel had said. By all means go, the king of Aram replied. I will send a letter to the king of Israel. So Naaman left, taking with him 10 talents of silver, 6,000 shekels of gold, and 10 sets of clothing. The letter that he took to the king of Israel read, with this letter I am sending my servant Naaman to you, so that you may cure him of his leprosy. As soon as the king of Israel read the letter, he tore his robes and said, am I God? Can I kill and bring back to life? Why does this fellow send someone to me to be cured of his leprosy? See how he is trying to pick a quarrel with me. When Elisha, the man of God, heard that the king of Israel had torn his robes, he sent him this message. Why have you torn your robes? Have the man come to me, and he will know that there is a prophet in Israel. So Naaman went with his horses and chariots and stopped at the door of Elisha's house. Elisha, now note this, rather than going to the door, Elisha sent a messenger to him to say, go wash yourself 7 times in the Jordan, and your flesh will be restored, and you will be cleansed. Now imagine, Naaman went all the way to his door, and rather than even facing him, Elisha sent a messenger. And so Naaman probably felt insulted. And yes, in fact, that's exactly what he says. It says, but Naaman went away angry and said, I thought that he would surely come out to me and stand and call on the name of the Lord, his God, wave his hand over the spot and cure me of my leprosy. Are not Abana and Pharpar, the rivers of Damascus, better than all the waters of Israel? Couldn't I wash in them and be cleansed? So he turned and went off in a rage. Now note that this point is kind of the things that had happened in different passages with Jesus. When Jesus cured people, he often did it right on the spot, but sometimes he would send them places. And the blind people he cured had the faith to go to those places immediately without questioning Jesus. But Naaman, unfortunately, was questioning. Naaman was showing his pride at this point. So Naaman's servants went to him and said, my father, if the prophet had told you to do some great thing, would you not have done it? How much more then, when he tells you, wash and be cleansed? So he went down and dipped himself in the Jordan 7 times, as the man of God had told him. And his flesh was restored and became clean, like that of a young boy. Okay, so just having a little bit of faith and listening and being obedient is very important. So I want to say hi, everybody who is in here. And hi, Jamie Russell. Hi, Jim Majors, St. Tommy, and Jesse Camping. So you guys are all welcome here. It's good to see you. And Jesse Camping already knew that story. He says it's his favorite story. I did not know that story. I read it because I did read the whole Bible, but somehow I must have glossed over that and not even really paid too much attention to it. But I want to tell you another story about the empty tomb. Now, there are claims by people that the empty tomb we have 4 different accounts of the empty tomb. And some commonalities between these accounts are the fact that Mary Magdalene was the first to discover the empty tomb. Okay, Mary Magdalene was the first to discover the empty tomb of Jesus. Now, what makes that super interesting is Mary Magdalene was a female. And according to Josephus, we were not to value the testimony of females, but yet Mary Magdalene was the first. Okay, so we know that. We also know that the other women Jesus appeared to. We also know that Jesus appeared first to Peter. Of the male apostles, he appeared first to Peter. And that's reported in both Corinthians, 1 Corinthians, and it's reported in Luke. Okay, so we know that he appeared first to Peter, then to the 12. Okay, we actually even know of the 12. We know that he appeared at one point to some of the 12, but we were missing doubting Thomas. Okay. And then we know that Thomas realized that he was late to the party and he was kind of bummed. And then Jesus appeared to him too. And Jesus asked him to feel his holes and the places where he had been crucified. So that's pretty awesome. And so here's what, no, according to Paul, actually, let me go ahead and read 1 Corinthians 15 to you guys in case you want to know exactly what Paul said. Okay. So he appeared, the resurrection of Christ. Now, brothers and sisters, I want to remind you of the gospel I preached to you, which you received and on which you have taken your stand. By this gospel you are saved, if you hold firmly to the word I preached to you. Otherwise, you have believed in vain. Now, this verse that I'm about to read to you comes from between 3 and 5 years after Jesus was crucified. And that's even according to people like Gert Ludemann and Bart Ehrman, who are agnostics or atheists. From what I received, okay, so here's what it says. From what I received, I passed on to you as of first importance, that Christ died for our sins according to the scriptures, that he was buried, that he was raised on the third day according to the scriptures, and that he appeared to Cephas, okay, that's Peter, and then to the 12. After that, he appeared to more than 500 of the brothers and sisters at the same time, most of whom are still living, though some have fallen asleep. Then he appeared to James, then to all the apostles, and last of all, he appeared to me. Now, he appeared to Paul probably a year or two after all of these other appearances, but he appeared to Paul multiple times. It wasn't just as reported in the book of Acts, okay? He has multiple appearances to Paul where he actually spoke to Paul and directed Paul and made sure that Paul was writing the correct words. In fact, Paul said it's very clear that the words that he was writing were not from him, they were from God. Okay, Paul made that pretty clear to us. And so, yeah, it doesn't, I see. So Jim, you're saying it didn't say anything about the women, Mary Magdalene, and that's correct. The 4 Gospels reported Mary Magdalene. That was my assertion. So here's what the empty tomb account from Mark. He says, and when the Sabbath was past, Mary Magdalene and Mary, the mother of James, and Salome had brought sweet spices, and they might come and anoint him. And very early in the morning, the first day of the week, they came unto the sepulchre of the rising of the sun. And they said among themselves, who shall roll away the stone from the door of the sepulchre? And when they looked, they saw that the stone was rolled away, for it was very great. And entering into the sepulchre, they saw a young man sitting on the right side, clothed in a long white garment, and they were affrighted. And he said unto them, be not affrighted. Ye seek Jesus of Nazareth, which was crucified. He is risen. He is not here. Behold the place where they laid him. But go your way, tell his disciples and Peter that he goeth before you in Galilee. There you will see him as he sent unto you. And they went out quickly and fled from the sepulchre, for they trembled and were amazed. Neither said they anything to any man, for they were afraid. Okay, so at that point, they didn't say anything. Now, Matthew reported, in the end of the Sabbath, as it began to dawn towards the first day of the week, came Mary Magdalene and the other Mary to see the sepulchre. And behold, there was a great earthquake, for the angel of the Lord descended from heaven, and came and rolled back a stone from the door, and sat upon it. His countenance was like lightning, and his raiment white as snow. And for fear of him, the keepers did shake, and became as dead men. And the angel answered and said unto the women, fear not ye, for I know that ye seek Jesus, which was crucified. He is not here, for he is risen, as he said. Come, see the place where the Lord lay. And go quickly, and tell his disciples that he is risen from the dead. And behold, he goeth before you into Galilee. There you shall see him. Lo, I have told you. And they departed quickly from the sepulchre, with fear and great joy, and did run to bring his disciples word. Now here we get the rest of the story. And as they went to tell his disciples, behold, Jesus met them, saying, all hail. And they came and held him by the feet and worshipped him. Then said Jesus unto them, be not afraid. Go tell my brethren that they go into Galilee, and there they shall see me. Now, when they were going, behold, some of the watch came into the city and showed unto the chief priests all the things that were done. So far we've got 2 pretty good accounts. I'm just looking here to see if, I sometimes I say Cephas and Cephas. I've heard 2 different pronunciations. I'm sure Jim's probably correct, and I'm probably incorrect. It's just for some reason, when I look at that word, it strikes me as Cephas. And I've heard Cephas before by my pastors. And so, but anyway, so here's what Luke says. Luke says, now upon the first day of the week, very early in the morning, they came unto the sepulchre, bringing the spices which they had prepared, and certain others with them. And they found the stone rolled away from the sepulchre, and they entered in and found not the body of the Lord Jesus. And it came to pass, as they were much perplexed thereabout, behold, two men stood by them in shining garments, and they were afraid, and bowed down to their faces to the earth, and said to them, Why ye seek the living among the dead? He is not here, but is risen. Remember how he spake unto you when he was in Galilee? Saying, The Son of Man must be delivered into the hands of sinful men, and be crucified, and the third day rise again. And they remembered his words, and returned from the sepulchre, and said all these things unto the 11, and to all the rest. It was Mary Magdalene, and Joanna, and Mary, the mother of James, the other women that were with them, which told these things unto the apostles. And their words seemed to them as idle tales. Now, of course, they're going to doubt that. Remember, they didn't value the testimony of females. And they believed them not. There arose Peter and ran unto the sepulchre, and stooping down, he beheld the linen clothes laid by themselves, and departed, wondering in himself at that which was come to pass. Okay, so we have that. Now we have John's report. John's report is the one probably that gives the most, a lot of really important details here. The first day of the week cometh Mary Magdalene early, when it was not yet dark, into the sepulchre, and seeth the stone taken away from the sepulchre. Then she runneth, and cometh to Simon Peter, and the other disciple, whom Jesus loved, and said unto them, They have taken away the Lord out of the sepulchre, and we know not where they have laid him. Peter therefore went forth, and the other disciple, and came to the sepulchre. So they ran both together, and the other disciple did outrun Peter. Now, of course, this is John. John is the beloved. John is the author of the Gospel of John, the son of Zebedee. We know that John is the author of the Gospel of John for a number of reasons. One is he's identifying himself here and both at the feet of Jesus during the crucifixion. He also is the only one who is noting 153 fish that were caught when Jesus was on the boat after his resurrection. And so that's an important point to note, because a fisherman, as John was, would want to point out how many fish specifically, because that was part of his trade. Then cometh Simon Peter following him, and went into the sepulchre, and seeth the linen clothes lie, and the napkin that was about his head, not lying with the linen clothes, but wrapped in together in a place by itself. Then went in with that other disciple, which came first to the sepulchre, and he saw and believed. For as yet they knew not the scripture, that he must rise again from the dead. Remember, Jesus said to them, how is it? If you try to destroy this, after 3 days, I will raise it up. They thought he was talking about the temple. They was talking about himself as a temple. One of the things that God makes really clear to us is in Genesis 1:27. We're all made in God's image. Man and women are made in God's image. And I just want to go off just a second here to mention something with the golden rule. Okay, I'm going to talk about that in just a second, the difference between the golden rule and the platinum rule, and why actually I believe the golden rule is superior. So I'm going to get into that in just a moment. Then the disciples went away again unto their own home. But Mary stood without at the sepulchre weeping. And as she wept, she stooped down and looked into the sepulchre, and seeth two angels in white sitting, the one at the head and the other at the feet, where the body of Jesus had laid him. And then they said unto her, Woman, why weepest thou? She saith unto them, Because they have taken away my Lord, and I know not where they have laid him. And when she had thus said, she turned herself back and saw Jesus standing, and knew not that it was Jesus. Jesus saith to her, Woman, why weepest thou? Whom seekest thou? She, supposing him to be the gardener, said unto him, Sir, if thou have borne him hence, tell me where thou hast laid him, and I will take him away. Jesus said to her, Mary. She turned herself and saith unto him, Rabboni, which is to say, Master. Jesus saith unto her, Touch me not, for I am not yet ascended into my Father, but go up to my brethren, and say unto them, I ascend unto my Father and your Father, and to my God and your God. Mary Magdalene came and told the disciples that she had seen the Lord, and that he had spoken these things unto her. Now, atheists make a number of assumptions to try to claim that there are contradictions here. One assumption they make is that there's only a single appearance of Mary at the tomb. But we know that actually John reports Mary first came to the tomb, saw it was empty, left, reported it to the disciples, and came back, okay? There's multiple occurrences. They were going back and forth. The same kind of thing happened with the women, okay? So we saw them going to the tomb, seeing it's empty, going back, coming back. Okay, so we've got that pattern. So one must assume the gospel authors made mention of figures also that they felt were key in the narrative. Just like sometimes you might say, well, a certain football team, like the great Tampa Bay Buccaneers, they were in the Super Bowl this year, pretty awesome, okay? And a lot of that's attributable to the quarterback, and a lot of people might want to just talk about the quarterback and not mention all of the other team members, but we know that all of the other team members were there. If authors made mention of one of the women, it doesn't mean others were not present. If authors made mention of one angel, it does not mean that another was present. It never said only one. It never said only Mary Magdalene, okay? It many times referenced other women, just which ones the particular authors felt were key, like Salome in one mention, the Mary, a different Mary in another mention. So you can equate this with a sports reporter, like I just mentioned, who reports on the quarterback of a football team, okay? So furthermore, note that ancient writings often were not ordered chronologically. With the exception of Luke, the other gospel authors did not strike for an orderly account. So here's my reconciliation. While it was still dark, Mary Magdalene traveled to the tomb where she found it to be empty. So she went to tell the disciples, as reported in John. At dawn, according to Matthew, just after sunset, according to Mark, she returned to the tomb with other women, including Mary, the mother of John, and Salome, where they found the angels, according to Mark. Some of the women returned to the apostles and told them about the angels, while Mary Magdalene may have lingered. At this point, the apostles had reports from multiple women that the tomb was empty and or the angels had appeared to them, according to Luke. These came from Mary Magdalene, Mary, the mother of James, Salome, Joanna, and others. So Peter and John ran to the tomb and confirmed that it was empty. Mary Magdalene started crying in front of the angels she saw in the tomb, according to John. Then Jesus appeared to her, telling her to go back to the apostles and let them know. Mary, the mother of James, joined her and they left. Jesus suddenly appeared again. Perhaps this was for Mary, the mother of James' benefit. Mary Magdalene then reported to the apostles that she had seen the risen Lord, according to John. Question your assumptions if claiming the Gospels are conflicting. Assumptions are also often built into this sort of a conversation. One cannot assume the women traveled in a pack, they never separated, as the Gospels don't make that claim. One also cannot assume the women only traveled to the tomb once. The Gospels never say that. John even noted 2 separate occasions that Mary Magdalene appeared at the tomb. It's likely the tomb was the epicenter of their attention, given the situation. Now, consider some of the amazing things from this story that I just want you to think about. Think about that women were the first to make this very important discovery of the empty tomb. And the reason why that's so important is because people try to pretend that Christianity is misogynist and all this sort of stuff. So that's completely absurd. Okay, that's completely absurd. Jesus actually elevated women quite a few times. When the Pharisees had grabbed a woman who was in the act of adultery and were ready to stone her, what did Jesus do? The only time he wrote in the Bible, the only time he wrote something in front of them, he actually stooped down to the ground. He wrote something that's not said, whatever it was, in the sand. And then he said, whichever one of them is not guilty of any sins, he can cast the first stone. Of course, they all departed, realizing that they're all guilty of sins. We all fall short in the glory of God. Also, and so what Jim Majors is doing right now is what is called in the silence idea. So it's saying, why doesn't Paul mention the women? Well, probably because the way the culture was. People were not likely to trust the women's testimony, not so much so as men. Now, Paul actually does mention some women who are very important. Like he mentions Priscilla, he mentions Lydia, and he mentions some other early church leaders. Okay, so he mentions some pretty important women like Phoebe also. And he actually entrusted a woman to bring his book that he wrote to the Romans. Okay, and that's pretty significant. So women were elevated quite a bit. In fact, one of the great things about Christianity that has occurred is take a look at Western culture and the role of women in society today versus, for example, Japan. Okay, take a look at how the Japanese treat their women. And if you guys don't know this, Japan ranks number 1 on Hofstede's scale of masculinity, meaning less gender egalitarianism. It's the least gender egalitarian in the world. I mean, you think the Arab countries are bad. Well, Japan actually, women have a very difficult time succeeding in high levels in business in Japan. You can ask a woman that today. You could ask them when Hofstede collected the data in the late 1960s. You can ask other cross-cultural authors which country has really high rankings of masculinity. So you look at the Arab region, you look at Japan, you look at other places in the world, women just do not have the kinds of roles that we have in the West. And we're enjoying that due to Christian values. Christianity is this idea that women were given really valuable roles. So another thing that Christianity has brought to society that has benefited us, I mean, there's so many things. So Christianity has also given us this idea of equality. Okay, our Constitution was written in our Declaration of Independence, and we realize that all men and women, when they say men in that case, it refers to humans. All humans are equal in the eyes of God. Okay, now they must have had some sort of a They must have had some sort of problem reconciling that, though, in the old days, because when people like Thomas Jefferson, he had slaves, how could he possibly think that? Well, they didn't believe that they were on equal footing, and they were totally wrong with that. And people realized that later. So Christians were the leaders in the abolitionist movement. Okay, so a lot of great people like Wilberforce, I think it's Wilberforce, something like that. But anyway, so we've had some really great people who helped to end slavery and to usher in this idea of offering education to all. If you go into countries today in the Arab region, you're going to see that women and males are kept separate in schools. Okay, they separate the two of them. They don't give them the exact same education. Some places, they don't even want women to be educated, like Afghanistan. Okay, some places like Saudi Arabia, women for up until just a couple of years ago had no right to drive a car. So how do you think that would stifle this idea of a woman working? Okay, so suddenly she's got to get some man to drive her when she wanted to go to work. So that's pretty bad. And so, but that's all steeped into the Quran, where it says women essentially have half the brains of men. Women have half the brains of men. Instead, what Paul said is, he said, neither slave nor free, nor Jew nor Greek, we're all equal in the eyes of God. Okay, we're all in the eyes of God. And God exalted us as equals. God exalted Eve as the helper of Adam. And later we have lots of references from Paul talking about the role of males and females and how important it is to respect. There is a hierarchy. Okay, there is a hierarchy. So here's the hierarchy. Jesus, the male head of the household, the female, that's the hierarchy. Now, some people might say, oh my gosh, that's so bad. You can't have two presidents. There's one president and a vice president. And that's how I would look at the household. That's really the way it's supposed to be. So, okay, so let's see if I have any thoughts here from the audience. What are the gospel accounts post-resurrection so different? Why are the gospel accounts post-resurrection? See, I just actually reconciled those. It's not, they aren't different, Marshall. They're actually, they just reconcile. They fit together like a glove. In fact, we would question if they were duplications. We would question their authenticity. We've got a guy like J. Warner Wallace, who was a former detective. He used to go into cold case crimes, and he would investigate different witness accounts. And he said that if any of the accounts were completely the same, he would realize there was some lying going on because people were saying the exact same thing. But if he saw stuff that had multiple perspectives and multiple insights, he actually realized that that had more authenticity. Now, as an atheist, he went to go investigate the Gospels, and he realized that, hey, wait a second, this is the truth. These are authentic accounts, and there are actually no provable contradictions. I've actually had people tell me that there is a contradiction with this idea of Judas, because we have one account of Judas having hanged himself, and we have another account of Judas falling headfirst. So the idea, they say this is irreconcilable. And I'm like, that's just silly. I can reconcile that in so many ways. One way I could reconcile it is to say that Judas maybe hanged himself on a tree that was maybe around a cliff. There are many cliffs in the area where he hanged himself. That's one reconciliation. Another idea would be to say that he hung himself by, or hanged himself by his feet, so he could fall like that. The other one is that he hanged himself and just tumbled down. And as he tumbled, it ended up, head first. And of course, his insides burst. And that's what happens after rigor mortis sets in. And so it's all quite plausible. Yeah, it's all logical, plausible, and probable. Right, John? So he says it's like atheist Jimbo, brainwashed atheist talking points. Majors just suspend all aspects of reality which contradict their worldview. And then Jim responds is biblical accounts don't contradict my worldview. They contradict yours. No, I love the Bible, and I love it because it's the truth. And so I told you about that verse with Naaman. My pastor told a pretty cool story today that kind of struck a chord, and I want to mention a little bit about that. It was his own personal story. When in 2004, and he cited the exact same time and the date, and I forget the date and the time that he said, but it was in 2004, he was at home with a bunch of males, and they were doing some sort of Bible study, and he had 3 kids. He has 3 kids, and one at the time they were 18, 17, and I think 12 is what he said. And he suddenly got a knock on the door, and these cops were there, and they told him that his wife had passed away in a car accident. And she was actually on her way to some sort of a prayer study in Orlando. And she was on the highway and unfortunately got into a crash. And so he was heartbroken. And he said his world just collapsed. And these males stuck around him and helped him and tried to help him in the grieving process. And he said he woke up the next day thinking he wanted to do something to keep himself busy and keep his mind busy. And so he realized that his sprinklers needed a lot of help. And so he went outside to kind of fix his sprinkler so that his grass wouldn't die. And he said a prayer to God. And he said it was a perfectly nice day out. There was no chance of rain at that point. Says a prayer to God. And within like a moment, suddenly it just pours rain on him and on his lawn. And I think that was a pretty compelling thing. It was God answering his prayers. And he was the one who actually told the story about Naaman and comparing Naaman to other accounts in the New Testament of when Jesus healed people. And there's something really important about a lot of that kind of stuff. I mean, a lot of it is, a lot of atheists will say, well, if God's true, he knows what I need. Okay, they'll say he knows what I need to see to verify that he is the truth. But God actually makes it pretty specific in a lot of different passages in the Bible that we have to take the first step. Okay, you can't get up the stairs without stepping on the first step. Okay, so you have to take the first step and ask in a very sincere way. Okay, I mentioned yesterday the acronym PRAY. You praise, you repent, you ask, and you yield. That's the acronym. And so you ask God to help you to get through a lot of these challenges. You ask him if you feel like he's let you down. You ask him, you say, you might wonder why. Just remember, in the grand scheme of things, he's got a much better, he's got it all taken care of. He's in control. And in the grand scheme of things, heaven is around the corner. Okay, and heaven is eternal, and it's going to be really wonderful. I discussed what it says in Revelation about heaven: gold paved roads, pearly gates, all kinds of beautiful stuff, emeralds and amethysts, and just beautiful, beautiful buildings and beautiful structures and open gates, and no need for sunlight. Okay, no night anymore. There's always a distinction in the Bible with night and day. Night being the time when all the evildoers are out, day being the time when the light is out. You see the light. Okay. But night can't overcome the light. And in heaven, it's lit up by the light. And who's the light? Jesus. So, okay, so let me just see here. I'm going to go over to a couple of passages. I want to show you this passage. I just opened it up. I like doing this. You guys are going to think I'm a little kooky for doing this, but I like just sort of randomly opening up the Bible to see what message does God have for me. And this is the coolest thing that I just fell upon. I'm so excited about this. So I just fell upon Matthew 8, and it said the cost of following Jesus is the first thing in front of my eyes. When Jesus saw the crowd around him, he gave orders to cross to the other side of the lake. Then a teacher of the law came to him and said, "Teacher, I will follow you wherever you go." Jesus replied, "Foxes have dens and birds have nests, but the Son of Man has no place to lay his head." And then another disciple said to him, "Lord, first let me go and bury my father." But Jesus told him, "Follow me and let the dead bury their own." So the next passage is Jesus calming the storm. Then he got into the boat and his disciples followed him. Suddenly a furious storm came up on the lake so that the waves swept over the boat, but Jesus was sleeping. The disciples went and woke him, saying, "Lord, save us, we're going to drown." He replied, "You have little faith. Why are you so afraid?" Then he got up and rebuked the winds and the waves, and it was completely calm. You see, Jesus is in charge, and this world is structured according to him. He's at the head. And so another little idea that I want to share with you is something that I heard from, what's his name? Nabil Qureshi. So Nabil Qureshi had a really cool story. He's a Muslim. He was raised a Muslim. He had Muslim apologists in his long line of parents and grandparents and everything. And so he said it's really difficult to leave the Muslim faith. And it's probably like the Mormon faith. Your family pretty much bounds you into the faith, and it's extremely difficult to leave. Same thing with JWs, Jehovah's Witnesses. Jehovah's Witnesses apparently are required to put in 10 hours of work spreading the good word. Now, since they can't come door to door due to the coronavirus, I've actually been getting handwritten letters from Jehovah's Witnesses. So as part of their witness, they're sending me these letters. Now, I'm really tempted. I think next one, I might even call this person up and chat with him or her. I think it's a her in the case that who's been sending me these letters. But I'm not going to convert to Jehovah's Witnesses because they don't believe that Jesus is divine as I do. Okay, and so Jesus calls himself the Son of Man and made reference to Daniel 7. You see, the Son of Man sitting at the right hand of the Mighty One coming in the clouds. Okay, he said this to the Pharisees, and for that reason he was crucified. Okay, because he compared himself to God. He said he was God. If you're sitting at the right hand of the Father, the Pharisees knew that means that you are equating yourself with the Father, and that is why they crucified him. So don't let anybody tell you anything different. There are some people who think, oh, well, the book of Mark was written first, and anything that came after Mark 16:8 was a later edition. Well, so what? It actually says in Mark 14:62, and you will see the Son of Man sitting at the right hand of the Mighty One. That is what Jesus said to the Pharisees, and they decided to crucify him. We also have in Mark a direct thing at the tomb where the angels basically said, he is not here, he is risen. Okay, he is risen. That's something we should all celebrate. It's really exciting. And so just I wanted to mention something also with the golden rule and the platinum rule. I have heard the golden rule as is something that all cultures tend to believe. It's studies have shown that every religious faith, and even atheism and humanism, as the American atheists and humanists and other people endorse a lot of these same ideas with the golden rule. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. Now, the platinum rule is do unto others as they would prefer. Okay, it's basically as they would prefer that you do. And people have tried to assert that the platinum rule, because platinum is more expensive than gold, is better than the golden rule. However, just note this with the golden rule. The idea of yourself, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. This is giving a self-value. Okay, this is giving a value to ourselves and our bodies, and us as people, as individuals, recognized of value. And so we're, as Genesis 1:27 says, we're made in God's image. Okay, so that's really important to think about. I want to take a moment just to say hi to everybody who's in the chat right now. I saw John Maddox a second ago. I see Slam, my good friend, Jim Majors, the canceled one, Marshall Sharp. So we've got, looks like a lively conversation. Jamie Russell, and I know that we've got a little mixture of atheists and atheists and Christians in the chat. And so, and Isaiah 53 learning, and then Jamie Russell again. So I want to mention this idea of Jesus calming the storm and how that's can be played out today. It's the idea of having a little bit of faith. Now, we've also got in the same passage, we've got Jesus restoring 2 demon-possessed men. You know, it's interesting. I was talking about this yesterday on my channel, but yesterday I mentioned the role of demons in the Bible and the role of angels. The book of Hebrews says that angels can be among us. And we've certainly met some real world angels here on this planet. We've met some true saints. I met one. One of the saints that I've met, I would call him an absolute saint, was named Jim Coey. And he's my sister-in-law's father. He departed from us not too long ago. He died of Alzheimer's, but he was really an amazing man, a very saintly man. He was always giving to other people out of the kindness of his heart. Every single Thanksgiving, he went around and delivered turkeys to people in need. And so he just did all of these great things, but he was just also just a really good person, a very giving and loving person. And he loved God. He loved God above all. And that's the number one rule. So the golden rule is really important. Love your neighbors as yourselves. But the first one is even more important. Love God above all else and love your neighbors as yourself. You see, Jesus didn't reverse the order of that. He particularly put that in the right order. Love God above all else. So if you don't love God, all right, and there's a lot of people, even in this chat, who don't love God or don't want to love God, you're not making a very good move. I mean, that's just, like, I know that the atheists hate Pascal's wager, but Pascal's wager is pretty spot on. I mean, why would you gamble against what could possibly be an eternal fate? We want to see all of you in heaven, you guys. We want you to be there. So it's really important. So I see also Joseph Turcotte in the chat. And so a lot of you guys, I don't even recognize you. So it's welcome to this conversation. I'm really excited about seeing you. I want to mention some other specifics. Now, people have said that the Gospels are not written by Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. However, we have no other, if somebody tells you that, say, what's the ancient support for your assertion? Well, in ancient times, we actually have a lot of the early church fathers supporting the authorship from Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. They don't give any other names. They don't say it was according to Harry or according to Lester. They say it's according to Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Now, we have internal support for the 2 apostles, Matthew and John. Okay, like for example, right on this one that I feel like God's drawing my attention to, right on the same page where he calmed the storm, he forgave and healed a paralyzed man. And then there's the calling of Matthew, uniquely reported in the book of Matthew. Matthew is a tax collector, the most hated and despised group of people. And here's what it says. As Jesus went on from there, he saw a man named Matthew sitting at the tax collector's booth. Follow me, he told him. And Matthew got up and followed him. Think about that. If somebody comes up to you, you're right in the middle of your work, you're sitting at your booth, you're doing your job, and he comes up to you and he says, follow me. You're more likely to probably say, why? Or where are you going? Who are you? No, Matthew got up and followed him. Just have a little faith. And he probably also had an inkling of this man obviously is important. So while Jesus was having dinner at Matthew's house, many tax collectors and sinners came and ate with him and his disciples. When the Pharisees saw this, they asked his disciples, why does your teacher eat with tax collectors and sinners? On hearing this, Jesus said, it's not the healthy who need a doctor, but the sick. But go and learn what this means. I desire mercy, not sacrifice. For I have not come to call the righteous, but sinners. You see, Jesus worked in the pits rather than the pedestals. He worked with people who were the lowest of the low, the tax collector. Everyone knew the tax collector was busy stealing from people. That's what they did. And Matthew, right in this passage, you can also tell this is Matthew because he doesn't reference how great of a house he had. Other gospel authors reference the size of the banquet that Matthew threw, okay? And, it was rather expensive and lavish banquet, okay? That only a tax collector who'd been, stealing money from people probably would be able to afford this big house. And so that's something reported by the others, but not by Matthew, which is another little hint that the book is written by Matthew. And so that's something that's important. Another really interesting thing that only Matthew reports is the time when Jesus tells Peter to go to a fish and open its mouth and pull out 2 coins to pay to pay his taxes. Okay, so why would Matthew have this particular interest in taxes and the fish and the 2 coins, which Peter did, and he found 2 coins and he paid the tax, or he found, I don't know if it was 1 coin that was worth 2 drachma or something like that, but it was something inside the mouth of a fish that Matthew uniquely reported. And so yes, so we have so that's pretty important. Another thing that is shown here is this idea of fasting. One of my faults is I don't really fast. I probably should, but because it says here, Jesus questioned about fasting. Then John's disciples came and asked him, how is it that we and the Pharisees fast often, but you disciples do not fast? Jesus answered, how can the guests of the bridegroom mourn while he is with them? The time will come when the bridegroom will be taken from them, then they will fast. No one sews a patch of unshrunk cloth on an old garment, for the patch will pull away from the garment, making it tear worse. Neither do people pour new wine into old wineskins. If they do, the skins will burst, the wine will run out, and the wineskins will be ruined. No, they pour new wine into the new wineskins, and both are preserved. One of the things that does occur while fasting, and many people did fast in the Gospels and in the Old and New Testament, is you get a little bit of insight. A lot of times God gives you insight during the fasting episodes. I want to go into, since I see people in the chat who probably are interested in the book of Daniel, which was written around in the 6th century BC. We've got plenty of evidence from Daniel himself, who claims authorship, and he was around in the 6th century BC. So we've got the book of Daniel, a really interesting passage in Daniel 12. I just want to show you that. Hold on, let me get. So we've got an interesting passage in Daniel 12. Okay, there we go. Okay, so Daniel 12. Here's what's really interesting, and another show of some stuff. So, wait, no, it's not Daniel 12 that I want to report. Hold on, let me find it. Okay. Okay, here it is. It's actually Daniel 10. In the 3rd year of Cyrus, king of Persia, who was given to Daniel, who was called Belteshazzar. Its message was true, and it concerned a great war. The understanding of the message came to him in a vision. And at that time, I, Daniel, mourned for 3 weeks. I ate no choice food, no meat or wine touched my lips, and I used no lotions at all. The 3 weeks were over. On the 24th day of the first month, I was standing at the bank of a great river, the Tigris. I looked up, and there before me was a man dressed in linen with a belt of fine gold from Uphaz around his waist. His body was like topaz, his face like lightning, his eyes like flaming torches, his arms and legs like the gleam of burnished bronze, and his voice like the son of a multitude. So notice here the fasting occurred first, and then the appearance. Okay, I, Daniel, was the only one who saw the vision. Those who were with me did not see it, but such terror overwhelmed them, so they fled and hid themselves. So I was left alone, gazing at this great vision. I had no strength left, my face turned deathly pale, and I was helpless. Then I heard him speaking, and I listened to him. I fell into a deep sleep, my face to the ground. He said, Daniel, you are highly esteemed. Consider carefully the words I'm about to speak to you and stand up. I have now been sent to you. And when he said this to me, I stood trembling. Do not be afraid, Daniel. Since the first day that you set your mind to gain understanding and to humble yourself before your God, your words were heard, and I have come in response to them. But the prince of the Persian kingdom resisted me 21 days. Then Michael, one of the chief princes, came to help me because I was detained there with the king of Persia. Now I have come to explain to you what will happen to your people in the future. Now, here's what's super interesting about this. You guys realize when people think there isn't a spiritual battle going on today, think again. There's absolutely a spiritual battle, and we see it going in little microcosms of hell like Twitter, okay? And even maybe in this chat, This is referring to specific angels, okay? Did you hear this part? But the prince of the Persian kingdom resisted me 21 days. Now, think about that in context of Psalm 82. Psalm 82 makes it clear that that there are other gods, there are other spirit beings. And at the time when Daniel was written, those spiritual beings were in authority over certain areas. And so this is a direct reference to one of them, the prince of Persia. Okay, he had resisted Michael, the angel, okay, for all of these days. And then finally, due to Daniel's fasting, Michael was able to overcome this prince. Okay, and so that's pretty important. And so what did he say? Soon I will return to fight against the prince of Persia, and when I go, the prince of Greece will come. But first I will tell you what is written in the book of truth. No one supports me against them except Michael, your prince. And in the first year of Darius the Mede, I took my stand to support and protect him. Okay, so he's going to talk. He talks about the end times in the book of Daniel, and he gives us a lot of evidence. And we also have references to the end times in Ezekiel. Throughout the Gospels, we've got references. And of course, we've got Revelation, which gives us a lot of references. But this gives us some specific references to what we can expect in the end times. So just think about that. Another thing that I want you to think about is, maybe it's Daniel. Okay, oh yeah, here it is. This is one of my favorite passages from Daniel. Okay, so there's this king, Belshazzar, and Belshazzar went in there. He went into the temple in Jerusalem, and he stole a bunch of artifacts. Like he stole a bunch of goblets and golden things and all that kind of stuff. And he decided that he was going to go ahead and throw a big feast. And so he was busy feasting with all of his friends and having a really good time when here's what he saw. Now just think about this. You guys remember, the little phrase writing on the wall? Well, here's where it came from. So it says, you praise the gods of silver and gold, of bronze, iron, wood, and stone, which cannot see or hear or understand, but you did not honor the God who holds in his hand your life and all your ways. Therefore, he sent the hand that wrote the inscription, so that while they're partying and having a good time, this hand appears on the wall, and it says, Mene, Mene, Tekel, Paris. Okay, and what does that mean? Mene, God has numbered the days of your reign and brought it to an end. Tekel, you have been weighed on the scales and found wanting. Paris, your kingdom is divided and given to the Medes and Persians. Of course, we also know from the book of Daniel, there were to be 4 kingdoms. Okay, so we have this idea that there were the 4 kingdoms, and that did pass through. Okay, so we had the Babylonian, we had Medo-Persia, we had Greece, and we had Rome, and that's reported. And we expected from the book of Daniel that the anointed one, okay, is going to come at a certain period of time after the call goes out to rebuild Jerusalem, to rebuild the church. And there are 4 different instances where there was a call to rebuild Jerusalem. And Jewish scholars like the Jews for Jesus and other people like that, and people like Dr. Michael Brown, have realized that this was probably around 444 BC when this one call went out to rebuild Jerusalem. So if you look at this with a Jewish calendar, with a 360-day year period, that brings us from that period, 77's less 7, 483 years, that brings us to the year 33. And now April 3rd of 33 is the year that many scholars, like Harold Hayner and others, have estimated was the time when Jesus was crucified. And they did this by looking at a lot of the data. But I've actually also looked at some scholarly work from geologists and others who realized that an earthquake did occur right around that same period of time in the year 33. Okay, because they look at these things called seismites in the Dead Sea Basin and other places to get evidence for that. And so we've got some pretty cool stuff in the book of Daniel. It's one of my favorite books. Someone asked me on Twitter, or maybe it was here, someone asked me if I would be willing to go into a den of lions like Daniel did. Like they're going to put me at a zoo and stick me into a cage with with lions. And so what's my answer? You know, someone asks you a crazy question like that, and then you never know. Someone might think that if I say yes, I would gladly go into a den of lions. Well, this person would probably say, okay, I'll organize that. And then what if I go with this idea that I'm going to test God? And I don't want to test God. So I would have to ask God in many ways to show me whether or not he wanted me to go into the den of lions. Well, Daniel was at the heart of God, really a rather perfect person. He was eating right. He was doing everything right. And he was pretty much awesome in the eyes of God. Then he went into the den of lions. Okay. So he went into den of lions for the crime of having prayed when he was supposedly not supposed to pray. So that's something. So I also want to say, I see Otangelo. Otangelo's been on my channel now a couple times, and he went on Skylar Fiction's channel a couple days ago and sort of lit things up. So I see him. He says, let me see what he's saying here. He's got the exact number, coincidence. I'm actually not sure what Otangelo's talking about here because I missed some of this. So let me just see if I can catch this. So this prophecy indeed can be seen outside the time domain. One of the most remarkable. All right, he's got a remarkable prophecy. I'm going to have to go back and see what Otangelo is saying on this. So let me just go up here a little bit. Okay, so he says from March 14th, okay, here we are. From March 14th, 445 BC to March 14th, 32 AD is 476 years. Remember, there's no year zero. That is 476 times 365 equals 173,740 days. Leap year does need to be added, and they don't occur in century years unless divisible by 400. So we must add 3 fewer leap year days in 4 centuries, which equals 116 total additional days. Okay, so he's got some pretty good stuff. So he's actually referring to the same prophecy that I'm referring to. And so that's something that's pretty neat. We also know from Malachi 3:1, we also know that the anointed one was to appear in the temple. Now, the temple that was around in Malachi, during Malachi, which is around, people have estimated it's the last book, and it was around 400 years before the Gospels. So in Malachi 3:1, it says the anointed one's going to appear in the temple, the second temple. Okay. The second temple was destroyed by the Romans in the year 70. So that gives us a time frame of when this anointed one was supposed to appear. Okay, before the year 70. So when did Jesus appear? Well, there are a lot of ancient sources have said he was born somewhere between 3 and 2 BC. Okay, and I can support that as well. Some have made some pretty specific estimates. Some believe, like Michael Heiser believes, that he was born September 11th of, is it 2 or 3 BC? I forget if it's 2 or 3 BC, but he actually looked at the constellations and star alignments and actually made that prediction. A lot of people try to say, oh, no, he was born somewhere between 4 and 6 BC. Now, I used to think that way. I used to think that based on people saying exactly when they thought Herod had died. However, and they look at Josephus to talk about when Herod had died. And Josephus said, he made a reference to the Passover, and he made a reference to an eclipse. And so there's a person called Schur, and they call it Schur's hypothesis. Schur hypothesized that this eclipse that occurred, there were only 2 eclipses in this time period when Herod was reigning. One was in 4 BC, the other was in 1 BC. The much stronger one was in 1 BC. And in fact, when the eclipse occurred in 1 BC, there was a greater period of time between the eclipse appearing and the Passover. And so then there was in the 4 BC. So 4 BC was what Scherer said. And then people estimated Jesus must have been born sometime before that, okay? But, and here's the clincher, 1 BC was a much stronger eclipse. And a lot of scholars now are saying that maybe this is the one where Herod died. And they point to the evidence that the amount of tasks that Josephus reported that Herod did between the time that the eclipse occurred and the Passover would not be possible to complete all of those tasks in the very small amount of time when the eclipse occurred in 4 BC and the Passover. So just that evidence alone has directed many scholars to say that Herod must have died in 1 BC. Okay, so that's something that people have claimed as some sort of an issue. Now, Otangelo and I actually disagree on the age, on the date, but you know what? Christians disagree. We'll know the truth at one point where we'll see exactly what these dates are when we pass on. And so another claim that people try to make concerning the Gospels and concerning all that stuff. Yeah, that's okay. So it's 3 BC, Jamie Russell says, according to Michael Heiser. So okay. So another thing that people try to argue about is they talk about Quirinius. And so let's see what it says in the Gospels about Quirinius in the book of Luke. Okay, so here's what Luke says. Now, we know that Luke was a doctor, medical doctor, very smart man. William Ramsay, who was a person who was out to disprove the Bible, he went to look around in the ancient Near East. This is in the late 1800s. And he realized what an accurate historian Luke was as well. And he praised him as being such an accurate historian. And actually, he converted to Christianity after looking at all of the evidence that had been documented so well in the book of Luke and Acts. So here's what Luke says about Quirinius. Okay, so he says, and this kind of talks about a few of these things. Wait, let me just make sure I get the right. Okay, so here's what Luke says. He says, many have undertaken to draw up an account of the things that have been fulfilled among us, just as they were handed down to us by those who from the first were eyewitnesses and servants of the word. Okay, so Luke is saying, now we know that Luke also traveled with Paul starting in Acts 16 because he starts referring to himself in the first person. We know that Paul knew John and James and Peter, so we do know that there were connections there. And we knew that they were all, telling their story from their own angles as they were traveling all around the ancient Near East to deliver the good news. So he said, first were eyewitnesses and servants of the Lord. With this in mind, since I myself have carefully investigated everything from the beginning, I too decided to write an orderly account for you, most excellent Theophilus, so that you may know, get this next page here, so that you may know certainty of the things you have been taught. In the time of Herod, king of Judea, there was a priest named Zechariah who belonged to the priestly division of Abijah. Okay, so he talks a little bit about that story. And then he says, the birth of Jesus. In the 6th month of Elizabeth's pregnancy, God sent the angel Gabriel to Nazareth, a town in Galilee, to a virgin pledged to be married to a man named Joseph, a descendant of David. The virgin's name was Mary. Okay, now we also know if you go to the book of Isaiah, you can see that the birth of to a virgin, to a young maiden, was predicted in Isaiah 7:14. Look at Isaiah 9:6 if you want to see the reference also to Jesus's birth. Okay, Prince of Peace. We're given a lot of information about that. Yesterday, I spoke to a young gentleman who was an agnostic, and I directed him to Psalm 22. He had never read Psalm 22, which was written prior to even inventing the crucifixion as a means of persecution, and it was also written prior to, obviously, the Gospels, about 1,000 years prior. Psalm 22 spoke of Jesus, a person being pierced, hands and feet, okay? The piercings also mentioned in Zechariah 12:10 and Isaiah 53. So take a look at that. We see a lot of fulfilled prophecies here. So anyway, so it says, all right, so we have this idea. We've got Mary, and here we go. In those days, Caesar Augustus issued a decree, a census should be taken of the entire Roman world. This was the first census that took place while Quirinius was a governor of Syria. So some people have said, oh, wait a second, there's a census in 6 AD, so this must be wrong. Okay, some people have made that claim. Well, actually, there was a census of the entire Roman world around 2 BC, okay, the Pater Patria. It was a big census of the Roman world. And so there were 2 censuses, and that's why they're specifying these different censuses, okay? So Quirinius, we have evidence from some archaeological evidence that Quirinius also was a proconsul in Syria around 11 BC and then going forward into some days. And so it's entirely likely that Quirinius also was in a leadership position during the time when Jesus was born. It can't be ruled out. So you want to just take a look at that kind of thing. So yeah, Otangelo says there's 356 prophecies in the Old Testament about the coming of the Messiah. Now, I actually have heard of 330, but I didn't know if we've got some more. That's even more fantastic. So this is all good stuff. And so if you guys are doubting and curious and worried and saying, oh, well, I don't believe anything the Bible says, do we have anything extra biblical? Well, sure. We've got lots of evidence supporting the Gospels outside of the Gospels, and lots of evidence from even ancient hostile sources. Okay, so take a look at what people like Suetonius and Josephus and Tacitus, take a look at what all of them said. Okay, take a look at that. It's really important that you consider that. So are there any questions or thoughts? Anyone want to? So Otangelo says, does Isaiah 53 predict that Jesus would be the Messiah? Well, you know what? I'll tell you, when I was praying to God to give me signs, to just let me know, I just wanted to know, is Christianity true? What is the real truth? Like, what is the truth? I found myself on a plane next to a pastor, and the pastor shared with me this. Here is what he said. He said, who has believed our message, and to whom has the arm of the Lord been revealed? He grew up before him like a tender shoot, like a root out of dry ground. He had no beauty or majesty to attract us to him, nothing in appearance that we should desire him. He was despised and rejected by mankind, a man of suffering and familiar with pain, like one whom people hide their face. He was despised, and we held him in low esteem. Who are we referring to? Let's keep listening. Now, some people have argued that this is the people of Israel or the nation of Israel, but this is not saying anything about the people or the nation. The people, you can't say the people have no beauty or majesty to attract us to them. You can't say that the nation has no beauty or majesty, for example. Those are just another one. So he took up our pain and bore our suffering, yet we considered him punished by God, stricken by him and afflicted. This is what the Pharisees were thinking. But he was pierced for our transgressions. He was crushed for our iniquities. The punishment that brought us peace was on him, and by his wounds we are healed. Jesus. Okay. Pretty good stuff. We all like sheep have gone astray. Each of us has turned to our own way, and the Lord has laid on him the iniquity of us all. He was oppressed and afflicted, yet he did not open his mouth. Now recall when the Pharisees, when people were spitting on him and everything, they wanted him to say, to say something. They wanted him to defend himself and say, no, this isn't the truth or whatever. But he was led like a lamb to the slaughter, and as a sheep before its shears is silent. So he did not open his mouth. By oppression and judgment he was taken away. Yet who of his generation protested? For he was cut off from the land of the living. For the transgression of the people he was punished. He was assigned a grave with the wicked and with the rich in his death. Think about that line right there. He was assigned a grave with the wicked and with the rich in his death. Of course, we know that Joseph of Arimathea was a very wealthy man who donated his cave, his tomb, to Jesus. Okay, this is predicted right here. So, nor was any deceit in his mouth, yet it was the Lord's will to crush him and cause him to suffer. Jesus took the sins of the world onto himself. And that's why when he cried out, he says, my God, why hast thou forsaken me? God, as the Father, could not be with sin. He couldn't put himself in with sin, in like a Holy Spirit inside Jesus' body with sin. So he had to be separated. When Jesus said that line, he drew our attention to Psalm 22. Okay, Psalm 22 is the first line of that. And Psalm 22 also talks about the bulls of Bashan who encircled him, tore up his clothes, and divided them up among themselves. And the Lord makes his life an offering for sin. He will see his offspring and prolong his days, and the will of the Lord will prosper in his hand. So he did. Okay, he did. His days were prolonged. We know that he appeared to the disciples. He appeared to people over a 40-day period, sometimes individually, as to Mary Magdalene and Peter and James, his brother, sometimes to groups. as he appeared a couple of times to the apostles. He appeared also and helped them out with fishing. He actually appeared a few times to the apostles. And then he appeared again over 40 days. He appeared at one point to 500. So that's pretty great stuff. So yeah, do I believe, that's a good question. So Tangelo says, do I believe the Shroud of Turin is the burial cloth of Jesus? I had Michael Heiser, no, it wasn't Michael Heiser, it was Gary Habermas. Gary Habermas has done a lot of studies on that. And he actually has supported this idea that some of the dating of the Shroud of Turin that people have done has been incorrect. And actually it does date back to Jesus's time. And so I think it's a very good chance that the Shroud of Turin is the burial cloth of Jesus. I think that people who deny that at the outset without giving it some serious inspection are depriving themselves of the truth. And so I think that there's a very good chance that the burial cloth is Jesus's. I actually also, and I don't know, Tangelo, what your background is. I know you're from Brazil, so I'm guessing you might be a Catholic, but I was raised Catholic. I also believe a lot of the miracles that we found. Like there's one called the miracle of the tilma, which is this cloth that somehow this woman had that's been preserved since then. It's miraculously been preserved. There are some other miracles where bodies somehow have miraculously been preserved. So there's some stuff going on. I know a lot of the time in the West, people try to, I will check out your link there. He's got a link if anyone wants to go to it. It looks like it's at reasonanscience.catsboard.com. And so we can go in there and look at, oh, that's right, you're Swiss. Okay. I keep forgetting all this stuff. But anyway, so take a look at Otangelo's link right there. Take a look at that information. But I think we've got evidence of miracles still occurring today. In fact, in my chat here a little while ago, Susan was. And Susan is a nurse who had a miracle occur for her. She was actually on her deathbed, pretty much literally in a hospice, when suddenly she started recovering from this what was supposed to be an illness that would have killed her. Okay, so we have something like that occurring, and her knowing that she was going to recover because of a message that had come to her from Jesus. We also have somebody like Barbara Comiskey-Snyder. Barbara Comiskey-Snyder had been in a wheelchair for years, and she used to go to this church. She went to a church all the time, and she would go to the church in her wheelchair, and people knew her as the one with the MS in a wheelchair. This goes back to the early 1980s. And she was laying in a bed. She could barely breathe. Her lungs had pretty much almost collapsed. Her body was just had really been declined. She couldn't walk at all, obviously, because she was in a wheelchair. But her body was really atrophied, and she had trouble with her vision and everything else. And so she's in this bed, and she suddenly hears, "My child, get up and walk." Well, guess what she did? She walked. She got out of bed. Her body immediately stopped the atrophy. She was able to walk around the room. She pretty much started dancing. And then she went into the church that afternoon, because I guess her church had afternoon services. She walked down the aisle, and the congregation saw her, and everyone started cheering. They had been praying for her. Okay. They actually had prayers go out on a radio station for Barbara Comiskey-Snyder. Prayers are answered. They're still answered today. And so on that note, I just want to say, so whether you eat, drink, or whatever you do it all in the glory of God. It's so good to see all of you guys today. Thank you for holding out, listening to what we talked about. Again, going back, we talked about the reconciliation, easy reconciliation of the empty tomb accounts. I offered one reconciliation. I think there's probably other alternatives, but no matter what they are, it's just, again, question people's assumptions. When they assume there's contradictions, they're building it on an assumption. Like, for example, when they assumed that Judas died in two different ways, they're building it on assumptions. They're not realizing that it could have been he initially hanged himself, and then he fell from the hanging. Okay, fell headlong. That's what it says. Totally reasonable. So anyway, so thank you so much. I hope you guys have a great day. Great to see you guys. Thanks, Sal. Thanks, Isaiah 53 Learning, Jamie Russell, Otangelo, James Wright. So you guys just have a great day. Don't go become Catholic. No, James, I'm a Baptist. I converted from Catholicism years ago, and actually I've been rebaptized. I was baptized. I'm a born again Christian, if you want to really label me that way. I actually like that label even a little bit better than saying I'm a Baptist, but I'm a Baptist, and I love the Baptist Church for a bunch of reasons. One is I love its contemporary services. I love the music. The music's incredibly uplifting. It's not like the solemn songs in the Catholic Church. And I also love the pastors who deliver really powerful messages each week, like I just referenced today. So our pastor today gave a great, very powerful sermon, which I posted on my Twitter account. So you guys, thanks. Have a wonderful day. Please like, subscribe, and do come again.